Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Donald Trump prepares to travel to the Middle East to address a number of key global challenges, including new investments for the U.S. economy. And Hamas hand over U.S.-Israeli hostage Edan Alexander, believed to be the last living American hostage. President Zelenskyy challenges President Putin to meet face-to-face in Turkey to discuss ceasefire plans. And Wall Street surges as the U.S. strike a trade deal with China. To our top story, and US President Donald Trump is embarking on a visit to the Middle East this week. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will meet the US President when he arrives in Riyadh on Tuesday. President Trump will then attend a summit of Gulf leaders before traveling to Qatar and the UAE later in the week. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Dubai 92 presenter John O'Hayes and media strategist and former editor-in-chief Michael Jabri-Pickett. Jono, let's start with you. Donald Trump is right now in the air. He's on his way to Riyadh. Can you run us through the main points of Trump's trip this week?
Well, as we said, there's a lot of stops on this whistle-stop tour over the next 3 days. First off, to Saudi, and it appears that the main aim of the game here is to achieve some investment, Leigh-Ann. It looks like he wants $1 trillion in Saudi investment. We also have heard of $100 billion in an arms deal with Saudi Arabia as well. And Trump is wasting no time re-engaging with what he sees as key global players, much like Saudi Arabia. And unusual for a US president to make his first trip, official large trip abroad to the Middle East region. But this one clearly is a meeting of strategy and it is a trip of diplomacy as well. And also one looking to revive the peace efforts of the Middle East. In Qatar, he's likely to look for a lifting of sanctions that have been placed on Syria while he's on his trip to there as well. And he'll also make a visit to the UAE, which is, and this is from what we're hearing, allegedly to talk about AI chips which are made in the UAE to reverse a Biden-led sanction and lift the export restrictions on those. So it seems that the main aim of the game here is a little bit of peace talks, a little bit of peace effort, economic deals to get onto the table, and to send a message that he's going to try and get results, that this administration is out to get the US influence back on the table again and to reassert what he is looking for, which is trade deals in the trillions and trillions of dollars. Yeah, absolutely. For me, I don't know about what you think, Michael, but we do know that AI seems to be featuring pretty high when it comes to what Donald Trump is going to be looking for when he comes over to the Middle East. But he also came to Saudi Arabia as his first foreign trip in his first term in the administration. So somewhere he clearly quite likes to visit.
2017, his first overseas trip as president, he came to Saudi, just as you said. And this time, as we've discussed, he's going to be making this whistle stop in these 3 countries over 3 days. There is a synergy between the Gulf leadership and Donald Trump's family. They understand each other. They understand what they're trying to do, and they understand what maybe we don't talk about publicly, but we all are in agreement. I think if you were to look at some of the success that China has in Africa, it's because China will come in and they will do business. They're not going to get sidetracked by some of the issues that some people might want to focus on. And Donald Trump is very similar. He wants to come in, he wants to sign deals, he wants trade deals, he wants massive investments from the Saudis and the Qataris, as well as the Emiratis in the US. And the Saudis and the Emiratis have talked about how much they will invest over the course of either President Trump's time in office or over the course of the next 10 years, which is what the Emiratis had spoken about recently. This is what he wants. He wants the deals. And the Gulf monarchies, they appreciate that he's going to come in and just stick to this language that is very familiar to them. And it's just about making sure that everybody is getting the agreements that they want on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. Straight talking Donald Trump coming to Saudi. But earlier, a former director of the Central Intelligence Agency Counterterrorism Center, Robert Grenier, told me why he thought Saudi Arabia had been chosen for the historic trip. Take a listen.
This is all part of a further tightening of relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia. In particular, as we all know, Saudi Arabia played a significant role in the context of U.S. negotiations with Russia and with Ukraine. Several of those negotiations that took place in Saudi Arabia under the auspices of Mohammed bin Salman. And so, yes, I think this is an auspicious week for the U.S. and specifically for Saudi-U.S. relations. Donald Trump feels very comfortable with the Saudi royal family in particular. There is the public aspect to this, the government-to-government aspect to this, but there's also a private and family aspect to this. As we know, the Trump family is heavily involved in making deals in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, and in Qatar, all of which form some of the background to this trip.
So, Jono and Michael, do you think that this trip could impact communications between the US and the Middle East? And maybe we could see things like the Abraham Accords come back into play. What's really on the table here?
Well, I think that is part of what we're going to see in the first couple of days. That is part of Trump 1.0, and that was the legacy of that. 2.0 will be looking to expand upon the Abraham Accords, likely to see if there's some Arab-Israeli cooperation that can be achieved through some media negotiation here as well. But I think economic trade deals is the key thing that will be on the table throughout the duration of this visit as well as what he sees as reversing back on some of the Biden-led sanctions that have been in place. I think once he achieves those things, and potentially with time on the way back to stop off in Turkey, when we'll speak about that in just a while, I think that will be the key strategy for the Gulf trip that he's about to embark upon.
Yeah, of course. And we've also seen, you know, if we're going to put a golden thread to the show today, it's Donald Trump, because Hamas released Edan Alexander, something we're going to talk about next, you know, as almost a gesture, because they knew Donald Trump was coming to the region. So he's having an impact.
He is having an impact, and this is exactly what he wants. He wants the headline of the day. So if he can talk about the deals that are maybe going to be signed, if he could talk about the investments that will be made in the U.S., if he can talk about an American-Israeli hostage being released, I think that he is in a unique position, not just as the president, but as a president that is mercurial and has a strong opinion and isn't going to stick to traditional diplomacy ways. That makes him a little bit unpredictable. And I think that when it comes to Hamas or when it comes to some of the other world leaders, they see him as not someone that they can play, but someone that they have to take into account, that the best way to make sure they get on his good side is to bring him into the conversation, to make him realize that he is essential to what's going on. And that, I think, plays to his ego. And that makes him feel like he then wants to help people a little bit more.
But it's also a good look for Saudi Arabia that Donald Trump is coming to this region and does want to invest, and he wants to have such a strong ties in many ways, economically and personally.
So it is good for Saudi. It's good for Saudi because they recognize that they can get a little bit of face time. They can speak to him about the issues that they want to focus on. And in turn, they recognize that it's a quid pro quo. We will sign deals with you, and we will invest in the States. We will get maybe arms deals in return. But we will also get a little bit of your attention, which I think is essential for the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris to do business on a global stage.
Well, thank you for your thoughts on that. As I did say, Donald Trump is on his way to Riyadh, and he will be landing tomorrow morning. But we'll be back with you shortly. We're just going to move on to another story. The US and China have agreed to major reductions in tariffs imposed against each other in another dramatic dial-down of trade tensions. Earlier today, President Trump talked about achieving a reset with China after the weekend talks, with Wall Street surging as a result. The two countries have 90 days to work towards a broader deal. China says it is committed to the stable development of relations with Washington. Patrick Falk reports.
Well, there's no doubt about it. This was a significant step in the de-escalation of trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. The tone from both sides following the discussions over the weekend in Geneva were positive, and Chinese media reported earlier in the day that the two countries had reached a series of major consensuses before the details were released later in a joint statement. The combined 145% levies on most Chinese exports have now been slashed to 30%, including the rate tied to fentanyl by May 14th, and the 125% duties imposed on US goods have been slashed to 10% now. This goes much further than markets or investors had expected, and certainly takes a lot of uncertainty off the table for the time being, which a lot of economists have noted was really important, because despite the fact that both sides had been standing their ground, there was plenty of indication that the tariff war was really beginning to hurt both sides. But one of the reasons behind the breakthrough appears to have been the result of the way the negotiations were conducted. China's trade czar, He Lifeng, complimented the Americans on their professionalism and pragmatic approach to resolving differences. It's fair to say there was a lot of concern about that, and China had insisted all along on respectful engagement. And despite some of the provocative language and comments US President Donald Trump had used in the lead up to all of this, to the talks, things do seem to have hit the right notes. Crucially, that appears to have paved the way for an off-ramp and for both sides to be able to back down without losing face, as it were. But some experts are pointing out that this is likely to be viewed as more of a win for China. Perhaps it has exceeded expectations, as I say, and before the joint statement was made, there was an expectation that the two sides would be aiming to bring the tariffs down to something more like 60%, which in many ways would have been problematic, as many economists have pointed out, because even though that would have been a big cut, it wouldn't necessarily have moved the needle an awful lot in terms of impact. Now, there is still a lot of work to be done, and the big question is what exactly happens at the end of the 90 days now. Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, has suggested that it could be extended, but also indicated that that would be based on good faith and constructive dialogue.
Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he's willing to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Istanbul this Thursday. It comes after European leaders urged Russia to agree to a 30-day ceasefire with Ukraine after being threatened with fresh sanctions. Earlier, US President Donald Trump talked about the importance of a Russia and Ukraine meeting and suggested he may travel to Istanbul for them. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy says he is ready to talk and end the war. Take a listen.
I will be in Turkey this Thursday, May 15th, and I am expecting Putin in Turkey personally. I hope this time Putin will not look for reasons why he can't do something. We are ready to talk to end the war. Thursday, Turkey. President Trump supported it. All leaders support it.
There we are. We just heard from Zelenskyy. But Michael, I must say something. Over the whole weekend, every morning I woke up, I felt like there was a lot going on. There was a lot of developments. What was going on this weekend?
I'm not going to get the timeline straight, so I'm not even going to try. But I will say there was a flurry of diplomatic activity. Yeah. You had a couple of presidents, one on Truth Social, another on X, President Trump and President Zelenskyy. You had the EU leaders in Kyiv. You had 4 EU leaders. You had the British Prime Minister, you had the French President, you had the leader of Poland and also of Germany there. They were talking, they said, what we're going to do after speaking to the United States, we're going to issue an ultimatum to Russia. And what we're going to want is for them to engage in a 30-day ceasefire. That then was countered with the Russians saying, no, we want direct peace talks. That then was countered by President Zelenskyy saying, well, why don't we meet in Istanbul and get it on? And that's where we are now, with President Trump talking about maybe he's going to make a stop in Istanbul for a potential face-to-face meeting between the two leaders.
A lot to digest, Jono, I must admit. Do you think Trump could attend the meeting? What do you reckon?
I mean, he may or may not. I think the threat of him attending the meeting may be enough to perhaps shove these negotiations on ever so slightly. His exact wording was, and to loosely quote, I was thinking of flying over. I don't know where I'm going to be on Thursday because I got a very busy week, as we just discussed.
I feel like he has a busy life.
He's a busy life.
Yeah.
He's a busy man right now. But we've got to get it done. So it does seem, and as Michael rightly pointed out, it's not just EU leaders. The US is also now saying we need to find something that is longer than a 3-day ceasefire. We need to have something tangible whereby we can say on paper, these are the terms and conditions of a ceasefire or of some meaningful peace talks. And this, I think, may be the first time, perhaps even since this conflict begun, that we have seen many people get involved and say, okay, the time is now, let's bring it to the table. And now if we have Zelenskyy and Putin both sitting down in the one room, in the same place at the same time to have these negotiations, which, let's face it, largely don't need to be done face-to-face, this may be the push that was necessary. And with Trump behind it saying that this diplomatic move might require, and it's a bit of a detour I will take in order to have my 2 cents to say in Turkey, this might be what's required. The week's events will play out and we'll get to see the bigger picture for this, but hopefully this is a move towards some level of peace in Ukraine.
Well, what I found interesting, you just touched on there that we could have Zelenskyy and Putin in a room talking. It seems almost unbelievable that two main leaders, I don't know what you and Michael think, but it's normally the diplomats who do this. And for this to happen will almost be pretty remarkable considering where we are.
I would be shocked if it were to happen. I would think that it would be more likely that maybe they would both be in the same city at the same time, maybe even in the same vicinity. But for them to come face to face, it almost seems as though that would be an unnecessary move. And I can't imagine that they would embrace, that they would want to see each other. It just seems like that sort of, and let's face it, both men would have a fairly strong, healthy ego. And I don't know that they would necessarily help the situation. It would be better to let the professionals, the diplomats, have those conversations.
Then again, in saying that the diplomats haven't been able to, I guess, give the commitment that is required. And I know that from the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov had said that Moscow may or may not consider Europe's ceasefire terms. So I guess the two people who at the end of the day are making those decisions are now, it seems, at least from Putin's point of view, willing to get into one room at the same time. And direct negotiations is what Vladimir Putin has suggested may happen. And as Turkey's president is offering to facilitate it, we may all be shocked. It may be a trifecta that occurs this weekend.
But I don't think that direct negotiations mean face-to-face. I would think that it would mean Russian counterparts speaking with their Ukrainian counterparts. And that would be the face-to-face. Not the face-to-face, but that would be the direct negotiations. That would be my take on it.
My concern is that they may be the monkeys, not the organ grinders, so to speak. The real decision is going to have to be made at the level of Vladimir Putin and of Vladimir Zelenskyy.
Yeah.
So having both in the same city at the same time, like you said, might be the reason that we end up getting those peace negotiations underway this Thursday.
But actually, earlier I spoke to Ukrainian MP Kira Rudak and asked her what Zelenskyy is actually prepared to give up in order to achieve a ceasefire deal. Just have a listen to what she said.
Answering is how to ensure a peace. How do you make sure that Russia would not attack us? And then we can be talking about which particular territories will be protected by these security guarantees. As of right now, we haven't heard any single actually productive or practical way of ensuring that Russia will keep their part of the bargain. So this should be the first and foremost question in discussions. And then when you know what would be the way of protecting this deal, of making sure that it will go ahead, then we can be talking about, again, which territories will be under this protection.
So I don't know, but during my conversation with Kira, I thought that was so interesting. She said, OK, we can have these talks, a ceasefire can be agreed, But who is going to police this ceasefire? Who is going to make sure that Russia and Ukraine stick to it on both sides? And how are they going to be held accountable?
Well, I think from what the EU leadership has accepted and what Donald Trump has said is that he needs the EU to step up. And it would make sense for an EU peacekeeping mission to be the one to somehow be there responsible for figuring out who did what. I would bet that some sort of combination of soldiers from various EU countries would have to come together and patrol the border to make sure that there were no infractions on either side.
I think exactly as Michael said, it has to be the EU because boots on ground from the US is an escalation of events, and it's certainly not what Donald Trump, I'm sure, wants to do, and it's certainly not what the EU would like to see happen either. US troops to go into a European country is not what anyone needs right now. The EU does need to step up, and I think, given, and as I've mentioned, we've had France, we've had England, we've had Germany, all say that this is the time for negotiations. We need to have some level of a discussion, and I think that they would all be willing to put forward troops, be it peacekeeping or otherwise, in order to police that. Until we know the terms and conditions, and from what Donald Trump has indicated, this may not be a ceasefire. This may be a peace deal which is on the table by the end of this week. Who knows?
But the only thing is there doesn't seem to be anything right now that's concrete. So maybe those details are being worked on and we could possibly see what they could be coming into the future. But I also wonder if threats of sanctions coming from Europe is something that Putin is playing on his mind. Because if those happen, the US could follow suit, and then Russia, economically is hit. So there's a lot of moving parts.
There are, 100% you're right. On Saturday, when the EU leadership team spoke with Donald Trump, they agreed that there would be sanctions if the Russian team did not agree by the end of Monday to a ceasefire. And the sanctions would be on oil exports and also on banking. And I think that there's only so much that Vladimir Putin and the Russians can withstand at a certain point. I think you have to cut your losses or cut your wins, in his case, where he's going to get presumably Crimea. Yeah. I think there has to be an acceptance that I've done as much as I can. It's like, this is a 3-year war, enough.
And I think him going to the table and saying, and he was the one who said he's willing to have those negotiations, I think that's the idea, that it will be a two-state solution, so to speak, more than anything else, is exactly what he requires right now. And I think, exactly like you said, Michael, at some point you have to go, hands up, I don't know if I can withstand any more sanctions. And today is the deadline, and no ceasefire agreement has been made. So he will be thinking that unless I do something right now, I can't really afford to have more sanctions placed upon the country yet again. He would weather the storm, but I think he would prefer otherwise. And
it's going to be interesting because, as you say, we don't know. Putin hasn't even come out and said, I'm going to go on Thursday. We obviously know Zelenskyy has. So I think, as you say, we'll have the bigger picture as we get towards the end of the week. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Hamas have released US-Israeli citizen Edan Alexander, a 21-year-old believed to be the last living American hostage in Gaza. Alexander was serving in the elite infantry on the Gaza border when he was captured by Hamas during the October the 7th attacks. His family say they have received the greatest gift imaginable, knowing he will return home. Earlier, I spoke to our correspondent Trent Murray, who's in Tel Aviv, about the developments.
When the news came through that Hamas had handed over 21-year-old Edan Alexander to the Red Cross, there were cheers and applause here from many of the Israelis which have gathered here, including many family members of hostages, both current and former. Of course, this news did come quite quickly, with Hamas announcing it late Sunday that they were releasing what is thought to be the last surviving American hostage in the Gaza Strip. They say they are doing that as a gesture of goodwill as President Trump prepares to fly to the region with his trip to Saudi Arabia tomorrow. Of course, for many families here, there are some mixed emotions, I think it's fair to say. They are, of course, relieved that another hostage is returning, but they are also, I think, worried that now Washington has extracted its last surviving hostage. Will they continue to put more pressure on Hamas to release what is thought to be around 23 or so still being held in the Gaza Strip? So right now, everyone glued to that big screen there behind me, which is showing the latest pictures coming out of Gaza. We've seen those Red Cross SUVs driving. We've also just seen a photograph released by Hamas showing Edan Alexander with 3 Hamas fighters as well as a Red Cross representative. He will be taken to an Israeli army base near the border with Gaza. President Trump called this a momentous occasion and said that they no longer thought he was alive. We know President Trump has also spoken with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in recent hours. Israeli media is reporting that he has authorized negotiating teams to now dispatch to the Middle East to try and get a longer-term ceasefire to be implemented potentially. Hamas is also saying in the past hour or so that it is ready to be involved in negotiations to reach a comprehensive, sustainable ceasefire agreement. That will be news, I would imagine, that will be warmly welcomed by many families here, including, as I say, the ones of the remaining 23 or so. They are desperate to get them home. Many people here quite critical of the current approach of the Israeli government, saying only a ceasefire is going to get their loved one back home here.
Now, video doorbells have quickly become a must-have gadget for households around the world, with their popularity soaring in recent years. While they offer added security for homeowners, the rise of these devices is also raising some privacy concerns. Let's debate the issue right now with Jono and Michael. So, I mean, Jono, let's talk about the pros of these cameras first. I know that you're a fan. I don't know how I knew that. I just knew you looked like the type.
I enjoy tech, I enjoy gadgets, and I think cameras go hand in hand with that. 1 in 5 of us now have some kind of a CCTV device in our house, be it your doorbell camera or an actual camera that's there as well. And I think this is what a lot of people would see it as a big thing it is a deterrent against crime. Now, if you're fortunate enough to live somewhere where it's not a deterrent against crime, it is a great way to be nosy about what's happening in the area where you live. And privacy concerns aside, I think inevitably you're out and about on the street every single day of the week. You are probably on countless video cameras. Right? Just at this second, aside from the cameras that are on us, there are probably several CCTV cameras observing everything we do from the moment we leave the house until the moment that you're back at home again in the evening. Unlocking your phone, simply that, is using your facial recognition. So therefore, my concern about the privacy or the safety is far outweighed by the fact that it gives you that privacy and safety. That anonymity, I don't think, is required anymore. And I don't think anyone has got, rights aside, anyone has that anonymity. If you go into a mall or a shop, you're waiving that right because you're on CCTV. So I don't understand why you'd be concerned to be on camera if you're not doing anything wrong.
In your house in your pajamas, Michael, what do you think?
So I think Jono has an issue that we should talk about. But I understand the idea that people should not, they should accept the fact that there's a camera on them all the time. The concern, though, is what about when that footage is used, maybe in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable? And what rights do I have, and what knowledge do I have that it's actually being used? And I think that's where a lot of people become concerned. I do think that there is also an issue. When we live, and we've become very much a society that views so much, either TV or our phones or something like this. And you know, the dopamine hit that you get, studies have shown, is not because of what you're watching. It's because of what you're about to see. And I think that's why you'll get a lot of people who will stand very close to their door to look out, or watching their phone as they're camera is looking out to see what is about to happen. And I think that that's what really entices people. And I think another negative part of it is that people end up doing this rather than somehow being more productive member of society. And those are some of the concerns that I think society faces.
What I think a camera does is the equivalent of what my grandmother or my mother would have done, which is to look out, but to hear something or a skirmish of some description, or to hear anything, and to then get yourself to a window or an opportunity position whereby you can view what's going on.
I go and water the garden.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
if you have a garden.
If I hear anyone shouting outside, I'm right out there on the patio.
I think we're hardwired to be nosy neighbours,
Yeah.
regardless. We want to know what's going on. My question is, you mentioned it, you're concerned as regards to what is being that CCTV footage being used for. Would that be something AI related, or where's the concern, or what is your concern if somebody's using that footage?
So it depends on if someone's hacking into my cloud and hacking into a camera that I have in my house. It also depends on where I have cameras. One of the issues, of course, and I have friends who have done this, where they have cameras hidden throughout their house when they're at work because they have a nanny and they have children. And I think that we sometimes take these things to an extreme. I don't want to act as though I'm naive and living in a fairyland, but I do think that there needs to be a better sense of community. And when there is a better sense of community, I think there's nothing wrong with, going out and watering the plants to hear what's going on. That's a little bit different than having footage of somebody doing something, slipping as they're going down the stairs, that then becomes incredibly popular and goes viral on social media. I think that, I know I'm not going to change it. And I know that society is going in the direction it's going in, and I know that people will always find that their phone so much more interesting nowadays than so many other activities in life. But I do think that there is maybe a step too far when, fine, you have the peephole so that you can look through, but I don't know that you necessarily need it on your phone to know that.
Okay, that I can completely understand. And I will say that 95%, and I keep everything as on the cloud, 95% of the time I will view it live. So I will get a notification to say somebody's at your door.
Yes.
It may not be my door at my home, it might be at my parents' house, which I also have heavily cameraed. I understand that may be a concern. But what I'm doing is viewing it live. I'm not going back afterwards to see what did you do at this time, who went in or who went out. That's not my concern as such.
But I wanted to pick up on that because, we're talking about the surveillance culture, but I remember there was a massive murder case where I lived in London, 2 roads down from me. It was the Sarah Everard case.
Yes.
And this was huge. It dominated our media for a long time. And the way they found her killer, he was a police officer. He knew how to evade the CCTV cameras, but he was picked up on a Ring doorbell. So I think this is really helpful when it comes to crime.
And you hear a lot of these stories whereby something is picked up by a CCTV camera. The Sarah Everard story was a huge example of that. And it also gets the funny clips. And I'm not saying that that's what it should be there for, but it is a peace of mind. It is a sense of security. From my parents' point of view, if they're traveling or they're not at home, and even from my point of view, even if it's just a delivery from Amazon, I feel like that is a sense of security that you know what's there. So it's taking it slightly away from the curtain twitching. Do I need to have it all in the cloud? I don't think it's necessary. I really don't. And I do think, Michael, you make a good point. There's a lot of things that are out there that I don't think necessarily need to be kept in the cloud. I think I've got an infinite supply of storage on there, and I just think it's completely pointless. But I still do it regardless, because I am a curtain twitcher at the end of the day, and I stand by that.
But I'm a curtain twitcher too, but I wouldn't have a Ring doorbell, which is interesting. And I think the reason is a little bit like what Michael said there. Ignorance is bliss in my life. And if I don't actually know what's really going on, I feel like I'll go outside and water the plants as a curtain twitcher, but then I don't have to watch my door. What happens if something happens with my dogs and I can't get there and I'm all anxious? All these things, right?
What I've noticed is that when I say walking around town or in a mall, and I see how people are addicted to their phones. They have their head down and they're looking, and it makes me want to. This sounds maybe as though I have I'm looking down on those people, but I want to be better than that. And I remember, now I'm sounding like the old man, yelling, "Get off my lawn." I remember a time when there was no phone. And I remember a time when there was more interaction. And I'm not necessarily somebody who wants that excessive amount of interaction, but I do think that there is making eye contact with people, which rarely happens nowadays. I think that there has to be a cutoff point. And so if there is a crime that's committed, fine. Survey everybody in the neighborhood, ask them for all their footage. I've got no problem with that. But up until then, that's when I think it's a slippery slope.
I think with the way facial recognition is moving forward, regardless of where you are in society, wherever you are on any given day, I think you're going to be on those cameras and you'll be recognizable from there. You referred to your animals that are at home. For a lot of farmers, this is also an option whereby everything is CCTV'd, so therefore you can see what's happening to your livestock, to your pets at home as well, to your elderly relatives who may be at home. And I'm not saying that my parents are, but it is a great sense of security that I feel, knowing that I can at any given moment open that camera, get a live view, and tell them that they are at home or that they're not at home based upon where the car is positioned. And yes, I appreciate that it does sound like I'm slightly addicted to the technology that exists. Yes, it would be better if I was able to do that face to face. Distance given that it's thousands of kilometers away, I feel that that gives me a sense of security, and therefore I'm here for the advancements.
Well, I think we've got to wrap it up here because there's so to talk about. I was just thinking if I had a camera on my parents' lounge, it would just be my dad watching golf all day. But anyway, let's move on. Michael, you're an quirky story, because we've actually reached that point in the show. I forgot where we are. We're being on about the technology. Jono and Michael, you've come up with a couple of quirky stories. Michael, yours is about AI.
And this, I think, is how AI can change the way that we look at what are daily occurrences. A sad story that has an interesting tale near the end, which is that in 2021, a 37-year-old man in Arizona was shot and killed in a road rage incident. In the States, they have the victim impact statement that can be delivered by the victim or a family member of, if the victim is deceased, to the judge before sentencing. The sister of the victim decided that what she was going to do was, she and her husband both work in tech. So instead of writing a victim statement, they decided they would write it in the first person of the victim, Christopher. And they then went one step further and they decided, let's create a video so Christopher is actually the one reading the victim impact statement. And the judge commented, loved it. The judge, in fact, actually sentenced the defendant to a year longer than what the state was asking for. And the nice little tale at the end is that one of the victim's nephews thought it was nice that Christopher was the one that was able to speak once more, and he thought that it gave him a little bit of an opportunity to say goodbye to his uncle.
And that is just...
See, a lot
so
of
it's amazing.
We mentioned
really.
AI and how AI is up to no good and it's here to take our jobs, but when it does something like that, I think that really it pulls on your heartstrings. And there's been mention of this. I'm not sure if you've heard, and there's been an episode of Black Mirror which was similarly based upon that, whereby they would have somebody who had already passed on be able to recount their memories to an AI generator, which thereby you'd be able to interact with and have a conversation with, which is real life tech, which is currently in the works. And it is the same company called Sesame who are working on a very realistic open AI which you can speak to in real time and have a sassy conversation with. It would also be a person who's deceased who can now recount their memories. They would feed in countless amount of information and you could talk to somebody who'd already passed on in their natural voice. And I think using AI for something like this really is what we should be doing, not making avatars for people who are already alive, but this is something that really can make a difference.
And Jono, just quickly, because we are fast running out of time, and I just wanted to ask you about a sandwich and the Pope.
Well, it's a Popewich. An iconic Chicago hot dog joint called Portillo's is celebrating the election of Pope Leo with a brand new sandwich, which is called the Leo, from the Windy City, where he originally came from. And I was trying to think what could be in there. It's an Italian beef dipped in gravy, and they've put on there the Holy Trinity of peppers, just to add a little bit of a bit of the Catholic Church into there as well. Sounds like a nice sandwich, and it's now available.
I absolutely love it. I hope it comes with chips. Right, Jono, you did that all in 20 seconds. You're such a pro. I want to say thanks to today's guests, of course, Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes and media strategist and former editor-in-chief Michael Jabri-Pickett. That's all from us on W News Extra. G&T with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.